From the outside, my life looked like something people envied. A solid brick house in a quiet Ohio suburb. Two kids, both grown now, one in Chicago, the other in Denver. A retirement account that, while not extravagant, meant I wouldn't have to worry. And after 30 years at the same company, I had the kind of pension that made younger guys shake their heads and say, they don't make them like that anymore. I kept a routine. Up at 6:30, black coffee, the local paper, a walk around the neighborhood, same route every morning, nodding at the same neighbors. The widower down the street, the young couple who always waved but never stopped to talk. Back home by 8 o'clock. Some days I'd tinker in the garage. Others, I'd just sit on the porch and watch the trees. People thought I was content, maybe even happy. And in a way, I was. Or at least I told myself I should be. But there were things no one saw. The way I still set the table for two out of habit, even though it had been 5 years since Karen left. The way I'd pause at old photos when dusting, our wedding day, that vacation in Maine, the kids' graduations, like I was waiting for some feeling to hit me. It never did. Not the way it used to. The truth was, I didn't miss her exactly. Not the fights, not the silence that grew between us like weeds. But I missed something. The weight of another person in the house. The sound of someone else's breath in the dark. Then, the letter came. It was a plain white envelope, no return address, just my name in handwriting I hadn't seen in years. Karen's. Precise. Neat. The way she did everything. I held it for a long time before opening it, turning it over in my hands like it might dissolve. Inside was a single sheet of paper. No greeting, no signature. Just 4 words. We should talk. Please. And just like that, the careful order of my life, the routines, the quiet, the illusion of control, felt like a house of cards. I folded the letter and put it back in the envelope. Then I did what I always did when something unsettled me. I made another cup of coffee, stirred in the sugar slowly, stared out the kitchen window at the empty backyard. But for the first time in years, I realized something. I was tired of being alone, and that scared me more than anything. I almost didn't go. 3 times that morning, I picked up my keys, set them back down, and told myself it was a mistake. What could Karen possibly want to say after 5 years of silence? An apology? A final goodbye? Or worse, some practical matter like paperwork or forgotten belongings, cold and impersonal, just like how we'd ended. But at 11:45, I found myself pulling into the gravel lot of Miller's Diner, the same place where we'd shared pancakes after our first date in '82. The neon sign still flickered, the vinyl booths were still cracked in the same places, and the air still smelled like coffee and grease. Time hadn't touched it. Not like it had touched us. I took the corner booth, the one we used to claim as ours, and waited. My hands didn't shake, but my chest felt too tight, like I'd been holding my breath without realizing it. When the bell above the door chimed, I didn't look up right away. I needed a second to prepare, to remember how to see her as she was now, not as she'd been in my memories. Then she slid into the seat across from me. Karen. Her hair was shorter, more gray than blonde, and there were lines around her eyes that hadn't been there before. But the way she held herself, chin slightly lifted, shoulders straight, was exactly the same. She didn't smile, but her voice was softer than I expected when she said, "Hi, Jack." I nodded. "Hi." A waitress came by, poured coffee without asking. Karen stirred in 2 sugars, just like she always had. The familiarity of it stung. We talked about nothing at first. The weather, the town, how the diner hadn't changed. Safe, easy topics. But then her hand brushed against the edge of the table, and I noticed the tremor. Small, barely there, but unmistakable. She saw me looking and tucked her hand into her lap. "It's nothing," she said quickly. But it wasn't nothing. And the way she said it, like she was used to dismissing concerns like she'd done it before, made my stomach twist. We fell into silence again. Outside, a truck rumbled past. Silverware clinked. Someone laughed at the counter. Normal sounds, but they felt far away, like the world had narrowed to just this booth, this moment, this woman I'd once known better than anyone. Then she reached into her purse and slid a small envelope across the table. "I found these," she said. "Thought you might want them." Inside were 3 faded Polaroids. Me holding our newborn son, his tiny fingers curled around mine. Photos I hadn't seen in decades. Photos I'd thought were lost. I didn't know what to say. The weight of all those years, all those unsaid things pressed down on me until I had to look away. When I finally met her eyes again, she was watching me with an expression I couldn't name. Not regret, not anger. Something quieter, something like hope. And that's when I realized this wasn't just about the past. It was about what came next. The photos burned in my hands. That tiny face, those perfect fingers, our son, who never took a breath. I'd buried this memory so deep I'd almost convinced myself I'd forgotten. But here he was, staring back at me from a faded Polaroid, and suddenly I was 28 years old again, holding a stillborn child while Karen sobbed into a hospital pillow. I cleared my throat. Why now? Karen wrapped both hands around her coffee mug, steadying the tremor. The afternoon light through the diner window caught the silver in her hair, the new hollows beneath her cheekbones. She looked like someone who'd been fighting a battle I didn't know about. Because I'm sick, Jack. The words landed like stones. The diner noises, the hiss of the grill, the clatter of plates, faded into white noise. Parkinson's, early stages. Treatable, not curable. She said it matter-of-factly, like she was reading a grocery list. But her eyes betrayed her. That same look she'd had when they handed her our silent baby all those years ago. Numb terror. I reached across the table without thinking. My calloused hand covered her trembling one. Her skin was cooler than I remembered. The contact startled us both. We hadn't touched in years. She didn't pull away. They say stress makes it worse, she murmured. All this unfinished business between us. I studied our joined hands, my work-roughened knuckles against her wedding band tan line that never faded. The past 5 years of solitude yawned between us, full of things we should have said. The waitress refilled our coffees. We sat in silence as steam curled between us. Karen finally spoke. I'm not asking for anything, but I needed you to know why. She trailed off, staring at our hands. I understood what she couldn't say. Why she'd reached out now. Time wasn't just slipping away, it was crumbling, and she didn't want to face that alone. The check came. I grabbed it automatically, an old habit. Karen smiled weakly. Some things never change. Walking her to her car, I noticed how carefully she placed her feet, like the ground might tilt unexpectedly. At her Toyota, she fumbled with the keys. I took them gently and unlocked the door for her. She paused before getting in. Do you ever wonder? The sentence hung unfinished, but I knew. Did I ever wonder what if? What if we'd grieved together instead of apart? What if we'd fought harder? The answer sat heavy in my chest, every damn day. But before I could say it, she squeezed my hand and slid into the driver's seat. As her taillights disappeared down Main Street, I stood in the empty parking lot, the Polaroid still in my pocket, wondering, was it too late for us to start being honest? I found myself driving to Karen's apartment 3 days later, a casserole dish warming the passenger seat like some middle-aged peace offering. It was an excuse, really, something to do with my hands so I wouldn't have to examine why I needed to see her again so soon. Her building hadn't changed. Same red brick, same rusted railings. But the woman who opened the door wasn't the composed stranger from the diner. This Karen wore faded yoga pants and a Stanford sweatshirt I recognized from our daughter's college years. Her hair was pulled into a messy ponytail, and for the first time since we'd reconnected, she looked completely unprepared for me. The apartment smelled like lavender and something medicinal underneath. Photographs lined the hallway, our kids' graduations, vacations I hadn't been on, a whole life that had continued without me. You didn't have to bring food, she said, taking the dish. But her fingers lingered against mine a second too long when she did. I followed her into the kitchen, noticing how she leaned slightly against the counter for balance. The tremor was worse today. She caught me looking and tucked her hands behind her back like a chastened child. Then I saw it, on the fridge, held by a magnet from the Grand Canyon we'd visited in '89, a medical bill partially obscured by a grocery list. The bolded past due stamp was unmistakable. Karen moved to block my view, but it was too late. We stood there, the air between us suddenly charged. "I've got it handled," she said too quickly. I nodded, pretending to believe her. The lies settled between us like dust. She busied herself with plates, her movements deliberately casual. "You still take your coffee black?" "Always." The normalcy of the exchange felt absurd, given what hung unspoken in the room. I watched her pour with unsteady hands, the liquid sloshing dangerously close to the rim. When she turned to hand it to me, there were tears in her eyes she refused to let fall. That's when I understood. This wasn't just about the money. It was about the fear, the indignity, the slow unraveling of control. All the things we'd never been able to admit to each other, not even at the end. The casserole sat untouched between us as we sipped our coffee in silence. Through the window, I could see the oak tree in her complex's courtyard, its leaves just beginning to turn. 30 years ago, we might have sat beneath a tree like that and talked about our future. Now we sat here, two strangers bound by history and hospital bills, pretending not to see the cracks widening between us. She set her cup down carefully. "There's something else." The way she said it made my chest tighten. Not with anger or even sadness, but with the awful familiar weight of anticipation. The knowledge that whatever came next would change things irrevocably. I realized then that I'd been wrong at the diner. Time wasn't running out. It had already slipped through our fingers, and neither of us had noticed until it was too late. Rain lashed against Karen's windows as she spoke, the droplets streaking the glass like faults in marble. I sat at her kitchen table, hands wrapped around a coffee gone cold, listening as she laid bare the truth she'd kept for decades. Our son hadn't been stillborn. He'd lived for 3 hours. The words hit like a physical blow. The mug slipped from my fingers, cracking against the table, but not shattering. Just like us, broken, but still holding together. Outside, thunder rolled low and long, the storm moving closer. Karen's hands trembled worse now, her voice barely above a whisper. "They said he wouldn't last the night. You were gone getting coffee. By the time you came back..." She trailed off, her gaze fixed on the water ring staining the wood between us. I remembered that morning with sudden, brutal clarity. The fluorescent lights of the hospital, the unnatural quiet of the nursery, the way Karen had turned her face to the wall when I returned. I thought it was grief. It had been guilt. The air in the kitchen grew thick, pressing against my lungs. 30 years. 30 years of believing we'd lost him before either of us could hold him. 30 years of silent car rides and separate mourning, all based on a lie I hadn't even known existed. I stood abruptly, chair scraping against linoleum, needed air, needed space, needed to not be in this kitchen with its medical bills and half-truths, and the ghost of a child we might have said goodbye to together. Karen didn't try to stop me as I walked to the living room, my steps heavy. The storm outside mirrored the turmoil in my chest. Anger and sorrow twisting together until I couldn't separate them. On her mantle, a framed photo caught my eye, our daughter's high school graduation. Karen stood beside her, smiling, but her hands were clenched white-knuckled at her sides. How many other moments had been shadowed by this secret? A floorboard creaked behind me. Karen stood in the doorway, backlit by the kitchen light, her silhouette smaller than I remembered. The years had carved lines around her mouth, hollows beneath her cheekbones. The woman who'd once been my whole world now seemed so fragile. "I wanted to tell you," she said. The raw honesty in her voice undid me. Rain drummed steadily against the roof. Somewhere in the apartment, a faucet dripped into a metal sink, a hollow, lonely sound. I thought of all the ways life had worn us down, the slow erosion of trust, the weight of unspoken words, the distances we'd let grow between us until they became impassable. And now this. The truth should have felt like absolution. Instead, it settled between us like one more thing we'd failed to face together. I turned back to the window, watching the storm distort the world outside. The real question wasn't why she'd kept the secret. It was why, after all these years, I still wanted to forgive her. The storm passed, leaving behind the kind of silence that only comes after the world has been washed clean. We sat on Karen's porch, the damp wood cool beneath us, the scent of rain and wet earth thick in the air. Neither of us spoke. The weight of her confession still hung between us, heavy as the humidity clinging to our skin. I watched her from the corner of my eye. The porch light caught the silver in her hair, the way her fingers absently traced the edge of her coffee cup, not trembling now, but moving with a quiet deliberation, as if she were memorizing the feel of it. I wanted to be angry. I should have been angry. 30 years. A lifetime of grief built on a lie. But the fury I'd expected never came. Instead, there was only a deep, aching sorrow, not for the son we'd lost, but for the years we'd wasted in silence. Karen shifted beside me, her shoulder brushing mine. A casual touch, but it sent a current through me, familiar and foreign all at once. "I'm sorry," she said, so softly I almost didn't hear it. I turned the words over in my mind, testing their weight. They weren't enough. They couldn't be. But then nothing ever would be. A moth fluttered against the porch light, its wings beating a frantic rhythm against the glass. I thought of our son, those 3 hours of life Karen had kept to herself. Had he cried? Had she held him? Did he have her eyes? The questions burned, but I didn't ask them, not yet. Instead, I reached for her hand. Her skin was warm, her fingers curling instinctively around mine, as if they'd been waiting. She let out a shaky breath, and I realized she'd been holding it, waiting for my reaction, for the other shoe to drop. But I was tired of dropping shoes, tired of the distance, the silence, the unspoken rules we'd built between us like walls. The night stretched out around us, the cicadas humming in the trees. Somewhere down the street, a car door slammed, and a burst of laughter floated through the air, a reminder that life went on, even when yours had stalled. Karen squeezed my hand. What now? It was the question I'd been avoiding. We were too old for grand gestures, too bruised for easy fixes, but we weren't dead yet. I looked at her, really looked, and saw the girl I'd fallen in love with, the woman I'd married, the stranger I'd divorced, and the person she'd become in the years between, all of them layered together like the rings of a tree. I didn't have an answer, but for the first time in decades, I wanted to find one with her. The choice was simple, really: stay or walk away. But as her thumb brushed over my knuckles, I knew I'd already decided. The morning after the storm, I woke to sunlight streaming through Karen's curtains, the kind of golden light that makes everything look softer, like the world had been gently remade overnight. She was still asleep beside me, her breathing steady, her fingers loosely curled around the edge of the blanket. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like an intruder in my own life. I slipped out of bed quietly, padding to the kitchen in my socks. The medical bill still hung on the fridge, but now it felt different. Not a secret, just a problem we could face. I filled the coffee pot, the familiar ritual grounding me as the scent filled the room. Outside, the neighborhood was waking up. A dog barked, a car engine turned over. The paperboy's bike tires crunched over wet gravel. Normal sounds. Life moving forward. Karen appeared in the doorway, wrapped in that old Stanford sweatshirt, her hair mussed from sleep. She hesitated, like she wasn't sure where she fit in this new version of us. I held out a mug, black for me, 2 sugars for her, and she took it with both hands, steadying herself against the counter as she sipped. We didn't speak. There was nothing left to confess, no more secrets to unearth, just the quiet understanding that we'd wasted too much time already. Her tremor was worse this morning. I watched her grip the mug tighter, her knuckles whitening with the effort. Without thinking, I reached out and covered her hands with mine, feeling the warmth of the coffee between us. She didn't pull away. "I should have told you," she said finally, her voice rough with sleep and something else. Regret, maybe, or relief. I knew she wasn't just talking about our son. She meant the diagnosis, the bills, the lonely nights when she must have wondered if she'd die without anyone noticing. "I should have asked," I replied. It was the closest we'd come to an apology, not for the lies, but for the silence, for all the ways we'd failed each other. She set her mug down carefully and turned to face me fully. In the morning light, I could see every line on her face, every year we'd spent apart etched into her skin. But her eyes were the same, still that impossible shade of blue, still looking at me like I was someone worth trusting. When she kissed me, it wasn't like the desperate, tearful reunions you see in movies. It was slower than that, softer. The kind of kiss that felt less like a beginning and more like a return, like coming home after a long trip and realizing the house still smells the same. Later, we sat on the porch steps, shoulders touching, watching the neighbors pass by. The sun was higher now, the air warm and thick with the scent of rain-soaked earth. Karen leaned into me, her head resting against my shoulder, and I wrapped an arm around her, feeling the familiar weight of her. It wasn't perfect. It wouldn't ever be. There were still bills to pay, doctors to call, a lifetime of grief to untangle, but for the first time in years, it felt like enough. I thought about our son, those 3 hours of his life I'd never known about. Maybe in some way, he'd brought us back here. Maybe love wasn't about grand gestures or flawless histories, but about showing up, even when you didn't know how. Karen sighed against me, her breath warm through my shirt. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. I kissed the top of her head, breathing in the familiar scent of her shampoo. "Just how much time we have left," I said. And for once, that was enough.